Hey, this is Chris Plush from CG Masters, and what we're going to do today is model a Harry Potter style magic wand and 3D print it using the website Shapeways.com. I've used this site for 3D printing before. They print fast and it's cheap too. I think I got this wand printed in plastic for like 12 bucks. I made it for my girlfriend who was quite happy with it. She's a big fan of Harry Potter. So we're going to make one today, and even if you're not interested in 3D printing it, the modeling process is still fun. Now the first thing we're going to do is just change a couple of user preferences real quick. So I'm going to go to the File menu, go down to User Preferences, and over in the Editing tab, I'm going to switch Align To from World to View. When it's set to World, then no matter what view you're in, if you add something like, say, a circle, it'll be aligned to the top view. But when you set it to View, then if I add a circle from Front View, I'll actually see that circle in Front View. So you don't have to keep it like this for your other projects, but it will definitely help you follow along with this one if you change that for now. If you want to keep this setting, then make sure you click on Save User Settings. All right, let's close that. And now since we're ultimately going to be 3D printing this, we want to make sure that we get the proportions or the dimensions exactly correct. So I'm going to go over to our scene options over here, and under length, I'm going to switch that to imperial because America won the war. I mean, you can use metric if you want, but I'm going to be giving you some precise dimensions and numbers to use when we're actually modeling this. So it's probably better to follow along with the course if you switch that over to imperial. Now, since we'll be working with inches, we'll be working with a really small object, which means we're going to have to zoom into it really far. Now, let me show you a problem that can occur when you have to zoom into something really far. Let me rotate this a little bit, and I'll press numpad 5 for perspective view. And when I zoom into the corner of the cube, when I get to a certain distance away from the surface, the camera starts clipping right on through it. Now, obviously, when you're working with a small object, you got to zoom into it. So when you're in perspective view, there's a chance it'll clip the whole object and you won't actually get to see it. So let me press the N key for the right side toolbar. And to fix this, just go down to the View panel and change the start value to as low as it can go. You can see that it's no longer clipping now, and we can zoom in a lot further before it actually starts to clip through the cube. All right, so that fixes that. Let me press numpad 7 for top view and numpad 5 for orthographic view. And then I'll press the N key to get rid of the right side toolbar. And then I'll press A once or twice until everything is selected, and I'll press X and just delete them. We're not going to need any of those. All right, so now we're ready to get started with the modeling. So we'll start off by working on the handle. So let's go into side view by pressing numpad 3. And let me center the view. And I'll press Shift and A to go into the Add menu and add a mesh circle. Now let's press the T key for the left side toolbar. And down here is the operator menu. Let me click on that border there and drag it up so we can see everything. So you can see this gives us parameters for the circle we just added. Just make sure that it says 32 vertices, and we're good to go. Let me zoom in on this. Now, right now, each of these blender units at this amount of zoom is 1 foot. So this is actually 2 feet in diameter, so it's gigantic. We're going to need to squash this down to the right dimensions. So let's go into edit mode by pressing tab, and then all the vertices are selected by default. So now let's press the S key to scale it, and I'm going to type in the value 0.0175. That'll shrink this down to about a little less than half an inch. So then press enter to confirm that. Now let's zoom in on it. Now at this zoom level, each of these blender units is 1 inch. So as you can see, the diameter of this is a little less than half an inch. And the whole wand itself is going to be about 11.5 inches long. All right, so we'll leave this menu up because we'll be using that again soon, I think at least. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take some of these vertices and we're going to scale them in to create those channels you see in the handle of the wand in the thumbnail. And now with all these vertices still selected, let's go down into the header and into the select menu and choose checker deselect. This will deselect every other vertex, but I want to skip a few. So let's go over into the operator menu and change the nth selection up to 4. That way it'll skip 3 and then select 1. All right, now with these selected, let's press S to start scaling these in, and I'll scale these into 0.8. So let me type in 0.8 and press enter. Now we have our channels there. However, they're going to be pretty uniform when we subsurface. I want it to be kind of smoother right here and then have a sharper fall off here. That's just going to look a little more interesting when we go to spiral this later on. So let me press the R key to start rotating these and hold Control and Shift for 1 degree increment rotation. And I'll rotate this to the left, -6 degrees, and then left click to confirm that. All right, there we go. And now what we're going to do is just extrude this to be the full length of the handle. So let's press numpad 1 to go into front view, and I'll zoom out a little bit. And let me select all the vertices. So I'll press A twice to select everything, and then I'll press E, and then press X immediately afterward to constrain it to the X-axis. And then I'll just drag this to the right to be about, let's see, about 3.75 inches should be fine. And then I'll left click to keep that there. Now you can see the faces on the outside are a little dark. This usually indicates that the faces are pointing in the wrong direction. Now the direction of the faces is called normals. So what we're going to do is just recalculate the normals by pressing A twice to select everything, and then press Control and N to recalculate the normal so they're all facing outside. You can see the shading has changed, so everything is good to go now. Now let's press Tab to get out of edit mode, and let's add a subsurf modifier for this to smooth it out more. So let's go over here and click on the wrench to go to the modifier buttons. Click on Add Modifier and select Subdivision Surface. All right, that's looking better. Let me just rotate the view so I can get a better idea of the shape. And let me increase the view subdivision levels to 2, same as the render levels. And now let's smooth out these faces. So I'll go over here into the toolbar and click on Smooth Shading. Now let's press Tab to go back into edit mode. And let me rotate the view. What we're going to do now is spiral this all the way down. But first we're going to need some more geometry in the middle in order to have good looking spirals. So let's press Ctrl and R to add more edge loops. And hover over the middle with the mouse until you see this purple circle. Now scroll up on the mouse wheel until we have 35 edge loop cuts. And you can see that number in the bottom left of the 3D view. Then left click to confirm that and right click to keep those cuts in place. Alright, cool. So now we have all the geometry we need to work with, and now we can start spiraling this. So to get this spiral going, first let's select the circle all the way on the right side. So I'm going to zoom in on it, and I'll hold the Alt key and right click on that edge right there, and it will select all the edges connected to it. So it selects just that circle for us. Now let me zoom out. Now let's enable proportional vertex editing by pressing the O key. Now what this does is if I, for example, go to move these vertices by pressing G, and let me scroll up on the mouse until we see the fall off circle, you'll see that all the vertices within that circle are moving along with our selection, but to a lesser extent the further away from that selection they are. So that's how fall off works with proportional vertex editing. So you get the idea of what we're gonna do now. We're gonna rotate this circle, and it's gonna give us our spiral like that all the way down the line. So let me right click on that to cancel. And now let's actually get this spiral going for real. So first let's change the fall off type. So let's go down into the 3D header here, and let's go into this menu for the editing fall off types. And right now it's set to smooth, and let me just show you what that does real quick. If I go to move this, you can see it's curved at the bottom, but it's also curved a little bit at the top. Let me right click to cancel that. Let's set this to sharp. Now if I move this, you can see it doesn't curve at the top anymore. It gives us more of a sharp point, and that's going to be more useful in doing this spiral process. Let me right click again to cancel. Now we're ready to rotate. So let's press the R key to start rotating, and then press X immediately afterward to start rotating on the X axis only. Now as you can see, the fall off circle isn't covering all the vertices. So we're going to need to scroll down on the mouse wheel until the proportional size is 0.16. And you can see the proportional size in the bottom header of the 3D view. All right, so that looks good to me. Now we're going to rotate this negative 700 degrees. So type in negative 700 and press enter. That gives us a spiral of about 1.5 times around. And it also makes the spirals more tight up toward the top of the handle and a little loosened up toward the bottom. This extra variation just looks a little bit better in the final product. All right, so let me press Tab to get out of edit mode, and we'll take a look at this. And that's looking pretty good. Now let's press numpad 1 for front view. Now what we're going to do is we're going to shape this by just moving some vertices up and then down, and then we're going to scale them a little bit. So what I'm going to do, just to give us a guide as to how to shape this, I'm going to use grease pencil. So over in the left side toolbar, I'll click on the grease pencil tab, and up at the top I'll choose poly. This will allow us to draw multiple lines. So I'll click on that, and let's see, I'll start at the top right here. I'll left click there, and then I'll bring this all the way to right about there. And then let's go up a little bit more now to about right there. And then we'll start going down. And then I'll bring it up a little bit right there. So that's the general shape I'm going to be going for when we're making this handle. So let's press enter to confirm that. And now if you rotate the view, you can see that drawing is just like in the middle of the 3D view. So this is great for drawing guidelines or for drawing in general. I've seen people do some pretty complex stuff with grease pencil, but for this project, we're just using it as a guideline. So let me press numpad 1 to go back into front view again. And I think we're done with the left side toolbar for a little while, so I'm going to press the T key to get rid of that. And now let's go into edit mode, and we'll start moving these vertices around to match up with the shape we just drew. So let's go back into edit mode now by pressing Tab. And let's press A once or twice until everything is selected. And let's move this up to kind of meet with the grease pencil lines we drew. So I'll press G and then Z to move it up to about right there, kind of in the middle of it all. And now we can start moving some vertices around. So let's start off with this peak right here. So I'm going to hold Alt and right click on that edge loop right there. And you might have to click a couple times to make sure you get the vertical one selected. Now press G and then Z, and we'll move that straight up. However, you can see our fall off is still rather large. So I'm going to scroll up on the mouse wheel until we get that fall off to be smaller. And that way it's starting to look exactly like I wanted to. So I'll place that right about there. And now hold Alt and right click on this edge loop here. I'll press G and then Z and move it down. And then I'll scroll up on the mouse wheel again so it makes the fall off smaller. And I'll place that right about there. And now hold Alt and right click on that edge loop. Press G and then Z and move it up. All right, that looks good. I think I want to scale this up as well. So I'm going to press S, and then I don't want to scale on the X axis. So I'll press Shift and X. So now it's only scaling on the Y and the Z. So I'll scale that up just a little bit. We're going to add some scale variations down the line as well. All right, let's move down here and we'll start fixing this up. So let's hold Alt and right click on that edge loop, then press G and then Z and move that straight down to about right there. I think looks good. Now hold Alt and right click on the end edge loop and press G and then Z, move it down, but scroll up on the mouse so the fall off is larger. And let's see, I think that looks about right. All right, so everything's looking pretty good. We just need to do some scaling now. And we'll start on the end here. I want the end of the handle to be a little bit larger. Let's zoom in a little bit. And now let's press S, and again we'll press Shift and X in order to lock the X axis. And then we'll scale that up, and I'll scroll up on the mouse wheel so the fall off's a little bit smaller. All right, I'll scale that up a little bit to about right there. I just want the end of this to be a bit more bulbous and the rest of the handle a little bit thinner. All right, well, now we're going to do some scaling all the way down the line, and we're going to start at each of the joints. So each time it changes direction, I'm going to make that joint a little bit bigger. So let's hold Alt and right click on this edge loop here, right where it changes direction. And I'll press S, and then immediately press Shift and X again to lock the X axis. And we'll scale that up, but let me scroll up on the mouse wheel to shrink the fall off. So I'll scale that up just a little bit like that. Then press G and Z, move it down a little bit. All right, cool. That's looking pretty good. Now we'll do the same thing up here at this joint. So let's hold Alt and right click on that edge loop. I'll press S and then Shift and X. Scale that up a little bit. And then press G and Z and move it up a little bit. Awesome. And we'll do that one more time right here. So hold Alt, right click on that edge loop. Press S and then Shift and X. Scale it up a little. And I think that looks pretty good. Actually, let me just press S and scale everything down right there a little bit. Let's just shrink this area in here to make this joint pop a little bit more. So let's hold Alt and right click on that edge loop. And let's press S to scale it down, but I don't think sharp fall off is going to work for us here. So let me right click to cancel that. Let me go down into the fall off menu and I'll select smooth. Now press S and then Shift and X. And we'll shrink that down to make those joints pop a little bit more. I think right about there looks pretty good. Yeah, it looks good. And we'll do the same thing right here. So hold Alt and right click on one of these edge loops, press S and then Shift and X, and we'll scale that down. Let me increase the fall off size by scrolling down on the mouse wheel. And I think that about looks right. Let me shrink it down a little bit more. All right, that's looking pretty cool, I think. All right, so now let's turn off this grease pencil layer since we're finished with that. Let's press the N key for the right side toolbar. And over here, there's a panel called Grease Pencil Layers. Let me click on that border there and drag it to the left. And in this panel, we can add or delete layers, and we can also make them invisible by clicking on this eye icon right here. So let's click on the eye there to make our current layer invisible. And I'll press the N key to get rid of the right side toolbar. And now we're going to work on capping off the left side here. Now let's zoom in on this, and I'll press Tab to go back into edit mode, and let's select the left side circle here by holding Alt and right clicking on that edge right there, and that'll select the whole loop for us. Now let me press Shift and D to duplicate it, and then right click to keep that in place. Now press the O key to turn off proportional vertex editing, and then press S and scale it all the way down like that. Now the reason I didn't extrude it down and instead duplicated it is because I want to use the smooth tool on it, and the smooth tool just works better when this isn't connected to anything else. So now let me press W and I'll select smooth. And it didn't quite smooth it enough for me, so I'm going to press the T key for the left side toolbar and increase repeat up to, let's keep it at 3. I don't want it to be a perfect circle, that would just kind of look weird. All right, let's press T to get rid of that toolbar. And now I'll press S to scale this up. Actually, right click. We'll connect it with faces first, and then we'll scale this up to be the right size. So let's select the outer ring as well by holding Alt and Shift and right click on that edge there, and that'll select both the outer and inner circles. Now press W and select Bridge Edge Loops. Now you might get a weird result here, and if you do, just press Ctrl and Z to undo it. Hold Alt and right click on this circle right there. Press S and scale it up just a little bit, and then try the whole thing again. Hold Alt and Shift, right click on that edge loop right there, press W and choose Bridge Edge Loops. All right, eventually you'll get the right process, but there are a few, when I was practicing this, it did screw up a few times, and all I needed to do was just scale it a little bit smaller or larger. Now let's hold Alt and right click on that edge loop right there, and press S and scale it up to about right there. Whoops, would help if I left clicked. There we go. Don't scale it up too much because we want a little rim right here, so don't scale it up past those vertices. All right, that's looking pretty good. Now press numpad 1 for front view, and we'll extrude this inward for some depth. So press the Z key to go into wireframe view, and then press E and then X, and extrude it into the handle to about right there. And then press S, and we'll scale that down a little bit. All right, how's that looking? That might be a little bit too deep. So let me press G twice, and that'll edge slide these toward the outer rim, and I'll just move it up a little bit like that so it's a bit more shallow. All right, that looks good. Now press E and then S and scale it in just a little bit. And then press E and then S and scale it in all the way to about right there. Left click and then press the F key to create a big n-gon in the middle of that. Now I want to create some depth with some rings in the middle of this. So let's press Ctrl and R to add some loop cuts in the middle here. So press Ctrl and R, hover over there until you see that purple circle, and scroll up on the mouse wheel until we get, let's go with 9 cuts. Then left click and right click to keep them in place. All right, now let's select a couple of rings and move them back on the X-axis. So let's see, I'm going to hold Alt and right click on that edge loop right there. Then I'll hold Alt and Shift, and we'll right click on that one, and let's grab this one. Now press G and then X and move it back on the X-axis until you get the depth that you want. So I'll drop it right about there. Now it's looking pretty uniform on the end here, so obviously we're going to need to add some variation. So let's press the O key for proportional vertex editing again, and then I'll right click on any vertex like that one right there, press G and move it up, and then scroll up on the mouse wheel until it's just affecting a handful of vertices around it. This is how we're going to create our variations. So I'll just move that up to right there, and then I'm just going to click around and move some vertices just to add some variation, however I see fit. I'm going to tab in and out of edit mode just to see how things are looking. All right, I'm finished with that. So once you're done playing with that, we're just going to do one last thing to finish off this cap. You can see the end here gets kind of smooth. That's because subsurfing is smoothing it out, and there's not any extra geometry on the end to give us a sharper corner. So I'm going to tab back into edit mode, and I'm going to add an extra edge loop here. So I'm going to press Ctrl and R until I see a loop cut right through the middle like that. Then I'll left click there, and I'll drag it to the left a little bit, closer to the edge. Then I'll left click to place it there. Let me tab out of edit mode so we can look at it now. So that just gave us a sharper rim there. I'm going to do the same thing for the inner rim because it kind of gets a little bit too soft there. So I'll tab back into edit mode. I'll press Ctrl and R on the inner rim right there. And then I'll left click and I'll drag that. Actually, I'll leave that in the center. I'll just right click to keep it in the middle. That sharpens all of that up. And yeah, that looks good to me. Cool. Now we're going to do one last thing before calling this complete. We're going to slant the end of this toward the right a little bit. So let me press tab to go back into edit mode, and I'll press the Z key to get into wireframe view. Now press B for border select, and left click and drag over all those vertices right there. Now make sure proportional vertex editing is still turned on. Then press Ctrl, Alt, Shift, and S for the shear tool. And I'm going to drag that to the right to slant it. And then I'll scroll down on the mouse wheel to make the fall off larger. I'll slant that to about right there and left click. Now press the Z key, and that definitely looks better with the slant than straight up and down. All right, now let's pan the view all the way down to the right side here. Now what we're going to do is work on a metal ring right here. We're going to work on that as a separate object, but first we need to place the cursor in the middle of the end circle here, because that's where I want the new objects to be added in. So hold Alt and right click on that edge right there to select that vertical edge loop, and then press Shift and S and choose cursor to select it. That'll place the cursor right in the middle of that selection. Now press Tab to get out of edit mode, and press numpad 1 for front view, and then press Shift and A and add a mesh circle. Now press the T key for the left side toolbar and decrease the number of vertices down to 20. Press T to get rid of the toolbar, then press Tab to go into edit mode, and then press S to scale this all the way down like that. I'll scale it down a little bit more too. What we're going to do is make 2 rings here, and then a flat area, and then 2 more rings. And then we're going to spin that around in a circle. So we're basically just creating the profile of the ring, which we're then going to spin around in a circle. All right, let's press O to turn off proportional vertex editing, and then I'll press G, and I'll move that up to there. I think that's a good size, maybe a little bit smaller. So I'll drop that there, press S and scale it down just a touch more. All right, so what we're going to do is have 2 circles next to each other, then a flat area. And we're also going to create a little pocket in here where the handle will actually go into. So what we'll do is I'm going to right click on that vertex right there, hold Shift, and right click on those 3. And then I'll press X and delete those vertices. So that leaves us with a little bit of a lip right here. And then I'll take this vertex and I'll just extrude it down to create the little pocket area. So I'll right click on that to select it, then press G and then Z and move it down to about right there, just so we have more of a smooth transition. And then press E to extrude it, and then press the Z key to extrude it straight down to about right there. All right, now let's create the other bumps here. So I'll press A to deselect everything, and then press B, and left click and drag over just the top vertices right there. Now I'll press Shift and D to duplicate it, then press X to move it just on the X axis, and move it to the right so that those 2 circles are touching. All right, and now what we need to do is join these 2 vertices right here. So I'll press A to deselect, press B, and left click and drag over them, and then press Alt and M and merge them at the center. All right, that's looking pretty good. Now press A twice to select everything, press Shift and D to duplicate, press X as you're dragging to the right, or press X to drag it to the right, and we'll drop that right about there. Now we need to flip this around, so I'm going to press S and then X, hold Control and scale it to -1. And there we go. Now we just need to bridge this gap, so I'm going to right click on that vertex, hold Shift and right click on that, and then press the F key. Now let's go over to the modifiers here, click on Add Modifier and add a subsurf modifier, and then increase the view levels to 2. Now you can see our flat area here is kind of rounded off because we don't have enough geometry here to keep that nice and sharp. So what I'll do is press W, choose Subdivide, and then press T, and we'll increase the subdivisions to, to 4. Then press T again. Now I'll select that one by right-clicking on it, hold Shift, and select that one. Press S to scale that up. And do the same thing with these. All right, there we go. And that ring's looking pretty good, I think. So now all we have to do is really just spin this around and maybe do some resizing. All right, now in order to spin this around, we're going to have to make sure the 3D cursor is right here. If you accidentally moved it, you'll just have to select the wand handle, go back into edit mode, and press Shift and S and choose cursor to selected to place it back in the middle of that selection. It's important that the 3D cursor is right there because that's the reference point the spin tool uses to actually spin our profile around. So let me right click on our profile again and press Tab to go back in edit mode. I'll press A twice to select everything and then press numpad 3 to go into side view. Can't really see much here, so I'm going to press the Z key for shaded view. And you can see the 3D cursor right in the middle there. That's where our profile is going to be spinning around. So let's start things off by pressing Alt and R to start the spin process. and then press the T key for the left side toolbar. And over here, we're going to be changing the angle to 360 degrees, and we'll change the number of steps up to 40. And there we go. And you'll notice some of the faces are different shaded than the others. That's because we need to recalculate the normals on them. So I'll press A twice to select everything, and then press Control and N to recalculate the normals. Now everything looks right. You'll also notice there's a bit of a gap right here. That's because when we spun this around 360 degrees, it didn't join the final vertices together. So what we'll do is press A once or twice to select everything, and then press W and choose Remove Doubles. That's going to merge any vertices that are within this distance right here. So basically, any vertices that are directly on top of each other get merged together, and that fixed our gap problem. All right, cool. Now what we'll do is we'll face up these inner circles here. So I'm going to hold Alt and right-click on that circle there. Then I'll just press F to create an N-gon, and I'll do the same thing with this circle. Excellent. So let's scale this down a little bit too. It turned out to be a little bit bigger than I'd like. So I'll press numpad 1 for front view. I'll press A twice to select everything, and then simply press S and scale that down to about right there. I want a nice snug fit with the handle. Now let's press Tab to get out of edit mode, and let's smooth this out by going over into our toolbar over here, go up to the Tools tab, and choose Smooth Shading. Now let's right-click on the handle. Let's do some editing on this to make this a nice snug fit. I'll press Tab to go back into edit mode, and the end circle should still be selected. So I'm going to press S and I'll scale that down a little bit like that, so it fits in that pocket better. Now hold Alt and right-click on this edge loop here, and I'll scale that up. So I'll press S to scale it up, just like that. And that looks good. I'm going to move this circle a little bit closer to the ring. So I'll press G and I'll move that to the right. Press S and scale it up a little bit more. So that creates a nice snug fit. Actually, it looks like the ring is actually interacting with the handle. Now to start on the rest of the wand, what we're going to do is place the 3D cursor right in the middle of this pocket here. So let's right click on the ring to select it, press Tab to go into edit mode, and hold Alt and right click on that middle edge loop right there. Now press Shift and S and choose cursor to select it. Now let's press Tab to get out of edit mode, and we'll create a new object by first going into side view by pressing numpad 3, and then press Shift and A and choose Mesh Circle. Now on the left side toolbar, let's decrease the number of vertices down to 16. And let's press Tab to go into edit mode, and then press S and scale that all the way down until it fits into that pocket, just like that. And now let's press numpad 1 to go into front view. I'll press the T key to get rid of the left side toolbar. And now what we'll do is we'll make a few extrusions, and then we'll extrude it all the way down so that the whole thing is 11 inches. We'll add a few loop cuts, and then we'll do some shaping. So let's start with the bulbous end here. Just like with the handle, we're going to make this have a bit of a snug fit here. So I'll press E and then X to extrude that to the right so that it's just outside the ring like that. And I'll drop that there, and then I'll press S to scale it up to about right there. Then press E and then X again, and we'll extrude it to right here and drop it. And then press E and X one more time to about right there, and then press S and we'll scale that down. All right, so there's our bulbous end, and this is the starting thickness of the longer wand piece. So let me zoom out. We want to extrude this all the way to the right so that the whole wand is 11.5 inches long. So let's see, we got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 and a half. So I'm going to left click there to place the cursor. And I'll press E and then X, and I'll extrude that all the way down to just before the cursor like that, and then I'll left click to drop it. And now I'll press S and we'll scale that down to about right there. And now let me zoom in. I'll press E and then X one more time to right there, right over the 3D cursor, and drop it. Then let's press S to scale it down to right there, and then press F to face the very end of it. All right, cool. Now let's press A twice to select everything, and press Control and N to recalculate the normals. And let's press numpad 1 for front view. Now we're going to add a few loop cuts and do some shaping. So let's press Control and R until we have a vertical loop cut highlighted in the middle. Left click there, and let's drag that to about right there, and left click. Now press G and then Z, and we'll move that down to about right there. And let's add another loop cut. So press Control and R again, left click there, and we'll drag it to right about there. Now press G and then Z and move that up. And press Ctrl and R. We'll add a loop cut here. Drag it to about right there. And press G and Z and move it down. So we have kind of a zigzag going on here. It would help if my left clicks were actually working today. There we go. All right, so that looks good from this view. We're going to have to do this from another view as well, because if I press numpad 7 to go in the top view, you can see that the whole wand is perfectly straight when we want this to be more scraggly. So with this selected, I'll press G and I'll move it down a little bit. And let's press Z for wireframe view, then press A to deselect, and then press B and left click and drag over them. And then I'll move them up to about right there. I'll deselect them, select these, and move them down. All right, so let me rotate the view, make sure it's not straight in any view. It's a little bit straight in this view, so what I think I'll do is select these vertices and move them up a little bit. And yeah, I think that's it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use a remesh modifier to actually give us a carved wood look. So with this still selected in object mode, let's go over to the modifier buttons, click on add modifier and select remesh. Now it's looking a little weird at the moment, but before we change any settings, I'll just give you a brief explanation of what remesh does. The remesh modifier is typically used to add new topology to your objects. It'll take all your existing topology and basically replace it with a grid of square faces. So you won't have any triangles in the end, you won't have any n-gons, you'll just be left with quads. So let's get this looking good, and then you'll be able to see more clearly exactly what this does. So we'll change the mode from sharp to smooth. That just gives us a smoother visual in the end. And we'll increase the octree depth, which is the size of the grid of faces being used. And when we increase that, the faces being used get smaller. So we'll increase that up to 7. And then if you press the Z key to go into wireframe view, you can see that grid of square faces being used. And let's change the scale, which is also for the scaling of those faces. We'll change this down to 0.8. And this gives us a good carved wood look to start off with. Now, I've never really used the remesh modifier for its intended purpose. I only used it because I kind of accidentally discovered that it actually makes a pretty decent carved wood effect. So I used it for this wand project, and that's pretty much the only time I ever used it. And let's see. All right, all the other settings are fine. And now what we're going to do is we're going to apply this modifier, and then we're going to make some modifications to it. So let's go back over to the modifier and just click on apply. Now if you press tab to go into edit mode, you'll see that all that geometry was made real, so now we can edit it. Now what we're going to do is two things now. We're going to take some of these carved areas and we're going to raise them up a little bit so the carvings are a little more prominent. But first we're going to take care of some of these weird quads like this one here and this one over there. We're going to close some of them up, but we're also going to leave a few as well because we're going to turn them into chips in the wood. All right, so let's just pan our way over to the top here. And let's join these two vertices right here together. So I'll right click on that, hold shift and right click on that. Then I'll press Alt and M and choose at center. This is going to merge those two vertices in the middle. And now let's select these two vertices and press Shift and R. Now the Shift and R hotkey is the hotkey for repeating the last process. And in this case, the last process was merging things together. So all we have to do now is select two vertices at a time and press Shift and R. So let's just go through and we'll do that. But remember to save a couple of these because we're going to be making them into chips after this. So I'll leave that one and then I'll just continue on and leave a few random ones unmerged. And now what we're going to do is zoom into all the chips we left behind, and we're going to create triangles out of them instead of these weird quads. It's just going to make the chips look a little bit better. So with that selected, I'll press tab to go into edit mode, and all we need to do is right click on one of those vertices, then hold shift and right click on the other and press the J key. And that'll connect them with an edge. Now to sell the chip even more, what you can do now is rotate the view and press G and move that down a little bit just to make the chip a little bit deeper. I don't know if these are actually going to 3D print. The detail might be too fine, but I also want just a good, decent 3D model out of this project as well. All right, that looks pretty cool. So now what we're going to do is just go through with all the chips we left behind, select the two vertices and press the J key to join them with an edge. Now let's make all the carvings a little bit more prominent so that this 3D prints a little better. What I mean by that is raised platforms like this one right here. What we're going to do is select all of that, and we're just going to move it up a little bit so that the bump is a little bit more extreme. So let me hold Alt and right click on that edge loop there. Then I'll hold Alt and Shift and right click on this one, and then that one, and then that one. And that selects a lot of extra vertices over there. So let me press Control and Z to undo that. And then I'll just hold Shift and I'll right click on the rest of the vertices here. Now let me rotate the view like this, and I'll simply press G and I'll move it up like that to raise that platform. Let me get out of edit mode and see how that looks. So that's basically all we're going to do. Any platforms we see, we'll either raise them up or we'll lower the areas around them just to make all the carvings more prominent. So let's move down to this one here. What I'll do here is just lower the area around it. So I'll right click on that, hold Shift and right click on that. Then I'll rotate the view and press G to move that down. And it kind of has a rise right here, which I want to get rid of. So I'll select these two vertices, move them down to kind of make that more gradual. And there we go. So that's basically all we'll do. We'll either select the platforms and move them away from the wand to bump them out more, or we'll select the area at the end of those platforms and just move them down to make it look like they're sticking up more. Now once you're done with that, just press Tab to get out of edit mode. And now for the final touch, what we're going to do is add a bevel modifier to this just to make things look a little bit better. So let me zoom in to an area like this right there. And I'll press the T key for the left side toolbar. And let's click on smooth shading for this. Let's press T again to get rid of that. And let's go over to the modifiers, click on add modifier and add a bevel modifier. And let's increase the number of segments to 3 to make the bevels more detailed. And what bevel modifier does is obviously it adds a bevel to all the edges. But right now it's adding a bevel modifier to even the edges in the flatter areas like this. That's why we still have this faceted look here. So we're going to need to change it from limit method of none to a limit method of angle. And when you set it to angle, that means it's going to bevel every angle that's above 30 degrees. So let me change this down to 10, and that'll do it. As you can see, this flatter area right here is not beveled, but the more extreme angles like around this raised area here are beveled. And that just gives us a real cool carved look for our twig-like wand here. All right, cool. So that does it for the main modeling. And now all that's left is to prep this for 3D printing. Now to prep this for 3D printing, all we need to do is apply the modifiers for each of the objects, and then we need to join them all together into one airtight mesh. So let's start with the right piece here. I'll right click on that to select it, and then I'll click on the apply button on the bevel modifier. And we need to make sure that all 3 of these objects are watertight or airtight individually as well, because that's going to be important when we go to use the Boolean modifier to join them all together. So let me make sure that that end is capped there, and it is. And that was capped when we used the remesh modifier. Kind of just does that automatically. And now let's right click on the ring to select it. And this already has caps, so that's already airtight. But I noticed a problem when I was reviewing things. So let me press the tab button to go into edit mode. And I'll press the Z key for wireframe. It looks like there's an extra circle on the inside there. So if you hold Alt and right, if you have this problem, you might not, but for whatever reason, I have this extra circle on the inside. So I'm going to hold Alt and right click on that circle right there. And then I'll press X and delete those vertices. I'm not sure where that circle came from, but that gets rid of it. Hopefully you didn't have that problem. So I'm going to zoom in on this side now and do the same thing. I'll hold Alt and right click on that circle, press X and delete the vertices. All right, so that fixes that up. I don't know if that would have caused any problems, but I just wanted to make sure we deleted that before we moved on. All right, now I'll press Tab to get out of edit mode, and let's apply the subsurf modifier. And now we're done with that object. And now I'll press H to hide it because I know we have a gap on the end of the handle here. So let me right click on that to select it. And we'll start off by clicking apply on the subsurf modifier. Then press Tab to go into edit mode. Let me zoom in and hold Alt and right click on that edge there, and it'll select that end circle for us. And now just press the F key to fill it with a big N-gon, and that makes it airtight. So let's press Tab to get out of edit mode, then press Alt and H to unhide our ring, and now we can work on joining these 3 together. And actually, before we join these together, we need to do one more thing. Let me press numpad 1 for front view. We need to make sure that each of these end objects here are intersecting with the ring, because obviously if they're kind of floating, if they're not touching each other, they're not going to join together right. So let me press the Z key for wireframe, and you can see that our handle is intersecting with the ring nicely, so they're going to join together just fine. But if I right click on this part of the wand here, you can see it's actually floating above the pocket. So what I'll do is press G and then X. And I'll move to the left until they're intersecting nicely like that, and then left click. All right, so everything should join together perfectly now. So let's right click on the handle to select it. Click on add modifier and add a Boolean modifier. That's the modifier we'll use to join all of these together. And let's change the operation to union since we're joining them. And let's click on the eyedropper object, or the eyedropper in the object field, and then left click on the ring there. And that'll join those two together. Although it looks like it didn't really join them together, I'm still seeing the handle intersecting with the ring instead of one airtight mesh. So let's change the solver from B-mesh to carve, which seems to work better most of the time in my experience. There we go, cool. And now we'll do the same thing with the other piece here, but first we'll need to apply the Boolean modifier. So let's click on apply, and then we'll add another one back in, and then we'll join it with the other piece. So let's click on add modifier again, add a Boolean modifier, change the operation to union, and change the solver to carve, and then left click on the eyedropper and left click on the right side piece there. And that should join together perfectly for us. Yep, there we go, cool. And now let's click on apply for that. And then press H to hide that, and we'll select these two objects and press X and delete them. Now I'll press Alt and H to bring back our hopefully airtight wand, and let's make sure it's completely airtight by right clicking on it to select it, then press Tab to go into edit mode, and let me zoom out, and press A once or twice to make sure everything is deselected. Now go into the select menu, go up to select all by trait, and click on non-manifold. What this does, it will select all of the vertices that are around gaps in the mesh. So if your mesh is completely airtight, if there's no holes in it, then no vertices will be selected. So let me left click on that and hope no vertices were selected, and we're good to go. No vertices have been selected. And you can see the vertex selection count up here. You can see it's got 0 out of 66,000 and some vertices. So that means that 0 vertices are selected. So our object is totally watertight and it's ready for print. All right, so let's press Tab to get out of edit mode. And what we're going to do now is export this model as an STL file, and then we can import that into Shapeways. Now, unfortunately, when testing this out, it seems like the STL format only recognizes the default Blender units. So if we tried to export this as is, it will have different dimensions in the end, which actually isn't that big of a deal because once you upload to Shapeways, you can then resize your models in Shapeways to be the right dimensions. But we're just going to real quick change this in Blender and then export. So let's go back over to the Scene tab, and let's change length back to none, which will give us our default Blender units back. And now let's press the N key for the right side toolbar. Now you'll see the Z dimension right here is 0.294. We need this to say 11.5. So let me zoom out a little bit, and I'll just press the S key, and I'll scale this up until that Z dimension is 11.5, or somewhere around there, and then I'll left click. All right, so now when we export this as an STL, each one of these Blender units will be interpreted as 1 inch. Now I just want to go over one last thing real quick before we export this. I just want to mention why I chose to keep things smooth shading during the modeling process. The smooth shading actually has no bearing on the 3D printing process. In fact, it might be a little bit misleading because that's not exactly how it's going to look when it prints out. When it prints out, it's going to be based on the amount of geometry and how big the faces are. It has nothing to do with the smooth shading that we see in the viewport. So let me press the T key for the left side toolbar, and I'm going to choose the flat shade this. This is going to give us a better indication of what the actual printing will look like. Let me press T to get rid of that. And the reason I kept things smooth shaded is just because it's a little bit easier to model like that when I'm seeing everything smooth instead of all these faces and this faceted look. Now, if we take a look at our handle, you can see the faces. However, the angles between them are so tiny that it's not going to matter for the printing process. This is definitely going to print out nice and smooth. And the ring here is going to print out nice and smooth as well. The only issue might be the larger faces on the end piece of the wand here. However, the angles between those faces is also very small, so that's definitely going to print out smooth as well. And I know that for a fact because I've actually already had this printed out. However, if you were worried about those faces being large and printing out faceted like that, what you could do is just go over to the modifiers, add yourself in another subsurf modifier on level 1, and then apply that modifier, and it'll give you a much more detailed look like that. So you can see those faces are much finer now, so that will 100% print out nice and smooth. But I know it's going to print out just fine like this. So now let's go up into the File menu, go down to Export, and select STL. Now let's rename this to whatever you want, Magic Wand Tutorial, and press Enter to save it. So now load up your internet browser and go to shapeways.com. And if you don't already have an account, create an account real quick. And once you log in, you should see your workshop stuff on the left side here. Then just simply click on upload. And let's change the model units to inches and click on select file and navigate to wherever you have saved that STL file and select that, open it up, and then click on upload. Now once it uploads, then it's going to process it and it's going to go through some auto checks through all the materials down here and tell you which materials it actually fits the requirements for and can be printed with. And it'll also give you the dimensions right here. And as you can see, you can resize it as well once it's actually finished the pre-processing. Now once your model is finished processing, you'll get a 3D view of it over here. And you can use the scroll wheel and left click and drag to zoom in and rotate. So just make sure everything looks good on there. And it does. And over on the left here, you can see we have our dimensions. And this is in centimeters by default, but this 29 centimeters is around 11.5 inches. So we're good to go with the dimensions. And like I said, if you wanted to resize it, just click on the resize button and you'll get some options for that. All right, let's check out all the different materials and how they passed or failed the tests. Now you'll notice that the auto checks failed on most of these materials, and that's just because the wand is too big to print on most of these materials. But some of the materials we can print on, even the ones that have some issues like these two up here. And if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, it actually looks like it totally passed the two materials down here for nylon plastic. But we're actually going to be printing this in a black, strong and flexible plastic up here. And it's only going to be $10.71. Let's check out the issues for that real quick and just make sure that they're minor. So you can see the checklist over here, and we just have a caution, or we just have warnings on one of these, and that's wall thickness. So I'll click on that, and it gives you some guidelines for the wall thickness here. And it also shows you a heat map over here. It will show you the trouble spots indicated in red. Let's zoom around and find our red spots. Let me zoom in on that. So it looks like we have a few tiny spots right here where the wall thickness is a little bit too thin and doesn't exactly fit into the guidelines. However, this looks incredibly minor, and that's not going to stop it from printing, so we can just go ahead and print this. So let's go back to the model, and under the black, strong and flexible plastic, just click on add to cart and then follow the instructions to actually purchase it. And here's the final print product. Not bad at all for 11 bucks. And that's actually all there is to it. If you like this tutorial and want to check out some of my training, then check out my step-by-step course, Complete Vehicle Production in Blender, which includes modeling this Jeep Wrangler inside and out, creating all the shaders from scratch, and rendering it in cycles. You can see more about that at cgmasters.net or follow the link in the description. So that'll do it for this tutorial, and I'll see you around.